Hi, guys. Thanks for joining us today for our second installment in the Mental Game of Wagering series with Jared Tendler. Now, today I am going to assume that you watched installment one. So either live 2 weeks ago or that you've watched it on YouTube since, because there was an awful lot of content that we covered there. And a bit like a good sequel to a movie, if you spend too much time recapping the plot of number one, it means that we're not going to get into number two. So got to assume you've watched that. However, before we get Jared back on, do have just a little bit of an intro from my side. So anyone who doesn't know me, my name is Kerrin Grosvenor. I work for Betfair in Australia and I head up the automation function here. So from that perspective, all about growing automation on the exchange and supporting people who have automated strategies. To the why we're here, why we're focusing on this. So having worked in this space for a while, had an awful lot of conversations with people about how emotions do or don't play out in what they do, and the role that emotions and therefore the mental game have in undermining or boosting what they do in their wagering journey. There's been a lot of conversations in the community in this space over the last few years, and a lot of Jared's work has been really popular. So it's been really great to have him be able to come and speak to his experience on the mental game, and as it specifically pertains to wagering, and even more to automation. So if you're here as someone who isn't automated first, and I can see some of the names here, and I know some of you aren't automated first, this is very relevant for you this week, even more than the last one. Last one we had a bit of a focus on automation compared to sort of manual strategies. Today I think it'll be far more just anyone who's on the exchange, anyone who has this in part of what they're doing. This will be relevant for you. So really great to have so many of you here and so many familiar names and people who were here last time, which is great. So a couple of things. Like I said, hopefully you know me, you know the team, you know the space. If you don't, you can get me, Ben and Ivan on automation@betfair.com.au. If there's anything we can help you with, hit us up there. If you're not already on the Quad Slack group, it's a shame, and you should be. Ivan will share a link in the chat so you can join the conversation there. If you watch this on YouTube later, again, you can email us at that automation email and we'll help you out with an invite. Through the next 57 minutes, Jared and I will be talking on a number of topics. We'll go over some of the homework we gave you from last time. We'll talk about bankroll management, the role that the mental game plays through your journey, and also when this being wagering isn't for you, how to know and what to do about it. If you have questions through the session, please pop them in the Q&A box, and we'll come to them as they fit into the conversation. Just before we start, I will just share a bit of a disclaimer. So do want to remind everyone here that gambling, both responsibly and within your means, is really important, obviously, and that your wagering activity should be entertainment and therefore enjoyable for you, and not something that causes you stress or anxiety. And if it's going the wrong side of that, please reach out and get some help, because we're here for this to be something that you enjoy. Now, without further ado, let's get Jared on. So Jared Tendler, mental game coach, cream of the crop. It's been really interesting, Jared, since our last session. Lots of people around work have gone, oh, so you're talking about him. I've read his stuff since. He's actually very good. I was telling you that.
It's not garbage.
I know. So great to have you here again, Jared, and thanks for staying up late. I appreciate it.
Yeah, nice to see you, Kerrin, and I appreciate not having to stay up as late as last time. I will be completely transparent. I'm thrilled that the last session was received so well. Truth be told, I was not on my A game towards the end there. I could feel myself getting a little fuzzy as I was beginning to fade off. So I'm glad that nobody could notice, but tonight I will be firmly on my A game for the next 55 minutes here.
Well, I appreciate that. Now, even having said that we are not recapping the original, do you mind doing maybe the 60-second intro to you, your background, and the mental game? Just for context.
So I've been a mental game coach for close to 17 years, working with high-level golfers, PGA Tour players, elite professional poker players that have won some of the largest tournaments all around the world, including cash game players. I work with several sports bettors, both in your home country as well as mine. Work with professional and institutional and retail traders, radiologists, MMA fighters, trial lawyers, and basically anybody that wants to be great at what they choose to do. The mental game is important because at this point in the course of human history, there's just so much available information out there that to dominate with just sort of information, competency and knowledge and skill in a kind of a chosen profession is no longer sufficient. You need to be able to access that competency as often as would be optimal. And to do that, you need, a kind of a clear mind, emotional stability, and a host of other things that are kind of in more of my domain. And so you put the combination of the two together, and that's what allows people to be great at what they choose to do. So yeah, for the last 17 years, I've been dedicated towards helping people to be at their best, and including myself, right? I talked a little bit last time about me getting back into highly competitive golf again. So I'm happy to say that I'm doing that. And it's a very different experience now than it was certainly 20, 25 years ago when I was aspiring to be a professional myself.
And I was saying earlier when we were sort of catching up before we started, but it's great to eat your own dog food, right? And just to remember what it's like on the ground. And just, I think it obviously helps you be better on both sides, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it's important to be able to walk the talk, and that's also important, for me to understand some of the nuances for myself, right? I think that it's always easier to give somebody else advice. I mean, I know people experience this all the time. I can tell somebody else they should do X, Y, and Z, but when it comes to me, why can't I do it too? And the reason is because when you have a third person perspective with somebody else, they are on their own hot seat, you are on your own hot seat. It's a fundamentally different thing. So for me to kind of translate that for myself is a unique challenge, and I take it. I mean, I have coaches myself. I'm not, kind of operating in an entire silo. So yeah, everybody needs good people around them to be at their best. It's
interesting. I remember having a conversation with one of the top manual traders on the exchange in Australia a few years ago, and talking about what they did to, what was their pre-game warm-up? What did they do before they started for the day? And their one non-negotiable was meditation. This was a gruff 60-something guy who, this was not how you would stereotype if you were a stereotyping person. He's like, that's my non-negotiable. And the times when I skip it, everything goes bad. Because as you said, like, you have to be in the right mental space. And particularly, we know across all sorts of industries, everything is getting more competitive. And your edge, whatever that is, and whatever it is that you do, as you said, you can't just rely on the technical. And that's, what's that je ne sais quoi? Well, it's interesting. So no, I'm really keen, and I think there were some really interesting things that came out of the first one. It was some great feedback that came from the community of people who were certainly not fresh to your work or to the concept of the mental game, who'd done a lot of their own work, who said they got a lot out of it. So that was really valuable for me to hear, that it wasn't just a great beginners thing, but there was value more broadly. Right. So obviously last time we talked sort of generally about the role of emotions, and particularly in the mental game, and then had a bit of a chat about the difference between manual and automated approaches. And I think that was really interesting. And we've had some really interesting follow-up conversations in the community on that, with people who'd made a judgment call one way or the other and were thinking about it a different way since. And then we talked about managing variance, and as part of that, talked about the A to C game analysis. That's obviously where we're going to start today. We gave people some homework,
Yep.
and great to see people did their homework. So some people have shared some of their A to C game flows over the last week, and I've forwarded some of those onto you. Would love your thoughts on those, and where you think where you might have some feedback, positive, negative, other.
Let's do it. I'm going to see if I can share my screen here and share the right one of these to start. And of course I did not. So let me try that again. And we'll go with this guy. There we go. Okay. So I think all of the examples that were sent in, the three of them that were sent in, I think did a very good job of making very clear distinctions between A game, B game, C game, and mental and tactical skill. Now, what I've kind of highlighted here is something that I didn't talk about in the last session. So I would not have expected this to have occurred. And yet we can always look for ways to improve this. In its optimal form, because you want to have just a very clean and easy way of evaluating yourself quickly, right? If you can kind of keep things on one line, right, it just makes it just a bit easier, right? So if we look at, right, here's a line where we've got distractions here, but then focus is here, right? There's not a version of focus that would be kind of a clear differentiator from a B game standpoint. So to this person, I would say, all right, I mean, short-term results focused, it doesn't really feel like the difference between being distracted and focused and the kind of middle ground between those two. So you just put it on line 9, move this kind of focus piece down here. We'll get rid of aware of results for a second, just so you can see it. Confidence disappears. And then that, right, that's what your version of kind of B game focus becomes. So same sort of thing here. I mean, this is not a complicated idea. You just put all of the kind of results points on one line. It just makes it easier from a sequential standpoint. And then I think more importantly, it will challenge you, because if you're talking about risk aversion, well, what's the B game version of risk aversion? I mean, it's unlikely that it's going to be 0. So a mild version of it, right? Uncertainty can be kind of fit with this. Overconfidence, right? What's the B game, excuse me, version of overconfidence? It just helps to kind of build it out a little bit more pragmatically.
I'm such a type A personality that I'm sitting here going, well, I'd be printing this off and laminating it and sitting it beside my desk and then using a highlighter to highlight whichever one I was at the beginning of the day to see where my mental map was.
You and my wife would get along very, very well. I am more like everybody else here, which is that, and then eventually maybe I'll figure it out. I mean, precision at the end of the day is what we're ultimately looking for. So we're just kind of trying to move the needle here. I think this is, so like the tactical side, just kind of looking down here now. I thought this was a very insightful note, right? Use emotions to rationalize results. So, there's again, a very kind of mental game centric C game, even on the tactical side of things. So for this person or anybody else that has something that is as meaty as this line, like turn off systems mid-meeting, that's a very specific thing. Use emotions to rationalize results. I want to have a whole conversation about that, right? And there's going to be so much that can be unpacked in there. And I think it's important to do that, not necessarily for an A to C game analysis, because it can all kind of fit under there. And we're looking for very kind of quick feedback on where and how we're performing. But from a mental hand history standpoint, from a better understanding your own problems, like that's the kind of stuff that you want to peer a little bit deeper into. Let me share this other one, which I believe is hidden on my side. There we go. So yeah, similar kind of feedback here, right? So I've kind of highlighted this down here. interesting challenge, annoying obstacle, screw this. Very, very clear sort of sequencing in terms of being able to understand the either progression of the problem or degradation thereof. The reckless, overly patient, like mildly impatient. So again, I think just kind of calling that out as a point of feedback. This one, I don't have a whole lot more, but I want to show you this one and then the other one. Pause the video if you want to see these in more detail, just to give yourself some feedback in terms of how to construct yours. But in general, what you see here, provides the parameters for what I would ultimately be looking for from the A to C analysis, which at the end of the day, I guess it did not switch that one. Let's see. There we go. Yeah, same deal here. So yeah, just another example for you to see. This is one of those tools. Once you nail it, this thing should not change for a minimum of 1 month. Okay. It is impossible for your C game to firmly progress, right? You can certainly reduce the frequency of it by large measure, but you cannot prove that it's gone within 30 days. It cannot happen.
It's like mental fitness, so physical fitness, right? That yes, you will improve gradually day by day, but actual significant change is not going to be marked between 1 week and the next.
Yeah, I mean, and the significant change we're talking about here is permanent.
Yes.
Right? So to permanently remove carelessness and moodiness, whatever the moodiness may be in your C game, it just can't happen because you're not. It's very, very unlikely that you're going to get enough of a test to prove in that time period that it's fundamentally upgraded. B, even if you do actually have the right test and you get enough data, I would be suspect that it's not going to show up in the future for some other reason. So by all means, right, significantly reduce the frequency of this crap, but do not kind of remove it from your current A to C game. Now, on the flip side, you can show inklings of kind of the new A game. And so I would suggest that in this, let's call it month, right? You spent several weeks formulating a very solid draft, like what we see here, and you're happy, but now you're actually kind of pushing yourself and C game is reducing and there's some flashes of new insight, new A game. And it's like, wow, I'm in the zone more often. And it's like, okay, write down the details. And it becomes kind of the R&D side of the, kind of future A to C game analysis that will be revised. So I would strongly advise that you're looking at doing revisions of this monthly based on the data that you find within that month.
And this goes with your inchworm concept, right? That,
it does, yeah, exactly.
You inch your top up and then you inch your bottom up as well, but you don't necessarily make, quantum leaps.
Yeah, exactly. And we don't want to, I think the progression of your inchworm, the progression of your A to C game can happen at all points, right? So I didn't mention like kind of the B game progress, but that can happen as well. And ultimately what B game progress ought to look like is that your A game becomes kind of your B game. You're kind of progressing that forward movement into that A game territory. And, sometimes it is kind of like a carbon copy of what was there and you create a new A game. Sometimes it becomes this sort of, kind of version of it that is slightly worse and slightly different. But again, I think if you're paying attention now over that, let's just say like kind of month over month over month, you are going to really be able to tease out some differences that right now feel completely beyond the realm with which you could be aware of. And you'll surprise yourself as to what kind of details you can identify.
If people were to focus first and foremost on improving one of their games, so this is something you've spoken to before, where would you, obviously you want focus across everywhere, perfect, but if someone were to choose A, B, or C to put their core focus on improving, which one would you recommend? Pick up your weaknesses, improve your middling, or really try and push the top?
So I will answer that question without answering it by saying, ask yourself the question, how wide is the gap between my best and my worst? And so the wider that gap goes, the more you want to focus on C game. The narrower it goes, right? Now it becomes, all right, if it feels like, no, actually it's reasonable, right? Then it's, no, hammer away at B game. If it feels like, oh my God, I have very little range, I'm almost always in my A game, then you have massive opportunity on the top end to push yourself and break through, likely some perfectionism, likely some fear that is like paralyzing that front end from actually kind of moving forward. And so it just kind of depends on where you currently are. And if most people have a wide range, that's like the most common mistake that I see. Big gap, because there is actually paralysis on the back end, right? The emotional problems, the FOMO, the tilt, the anger, the perfectionism, the fear, confidence issues kind of make that back end intractable. So you can't actually get into your A game more often. So you do need to be focused more on C game, which, may be a nice little bridge over to the mental hand history as our second topic, because the mental hand history is, in my mind, like my primary tool for helping to unlock that back end, so you can actually, kind of move it forward in a practical, pragmatic way.
It's a good answer, and I like that it is practical and pragmatic too. That's fundamentally what I love about a lot of your stuff. It's not airy fairy theoretical. It's meaty. So this was sort of a bonus round. Good old community champion
Paul. Yep.
Paul was very kind and did a hand history and shared it on his experience with losing runs. And I know that a lot of the guys have had a lot of feedback on this themselves and gone on this, copy paste. That's my experience as well, which is really, really good. But I was keen for your thoughts on this.
Yeah, so I think because there's a lot of text here, I think it would be helpful for me to kind of read it and then provide a bit of commentary as we go. And so because I could kind of bounce around, but it would be kind of harder for y'all to follow. So let's just look at this as we go. Losing streaks bring on a fear of the system's failing. The fear is that I have put in all of this hard work and it won't continue to be profitable. It's the fear of losing what I imagine is possible with the winnings. Okay, so basically he's talking about kind of future goals, and particularly the fact that I would need to continue working when I would need to continue working when I want to have to work when I want to have to work a job to be a choice, not a necessity. I can handle one or two losing days easy, even if they are large. It's when a string of days occur in a short period of time that the fear sets in. As the losing run increases, it is a feeling that is not variance anymore, and there's something wrong or something has changed, right? So that is really kind of the beginning of where my mind kind of clicks into. Now we're starting to get at the meat of where something is off. Okay. So everything up until this point has really been very kind of practical, very reasonable, right? So the fear of having to get a job, fear of like making money in a way that's not your chosen professions, like it's very reasonable, right? So there's nothing necessarily flawed about that until we get to this, right? Now there's a feeling that it's not variance anymore and something is wrong or something has changed. This can occur even though the losses have not gotten anywhere near my maximum drawdowns, further reinforcing the seeming irrationality around this. There's a feeling of disappointment in not being at the top of my bank anymore. More, right? Because, what is a very common thing, you get very kind of attached to your high water mark and not allow it to actually continue to go through the ups and downs that are normal. A losing run can also dent my view of myself as a profitable sports bettor. I put myself out there to friends, family, the internet record. If I hit a losing run, I feel people will change the way people see my results, as short-term results are always in people's minds. I feel this could change the way they perceive my betting and might start to call it a problem gambling, i.e. you lost 30K and it's not that good, blah, 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 blah. You get the point. So the beginning framed what was going on, but this is, kind of the meat. And so for any of you that are kind of beginning to put in the work for this, this is the kind of stuff that you really want to get in. And very often, I think, I know Paul has had more experience working with this tool, working with my material. So invariably, like what these kinds of things are going to come out in steps 2 and 3, typically, right? The fact that he's been able to identify them all here in step 1 is a reflection of the amount of work that he's done. It's not a reflection that he is special and capable of doing mental game work better than anybody else, right? He is just farther along
Maturity.
in the process. Yeah, and that's it. Self-aware, able to kind of self-reflect, clearly is putting in time to write and to think and reflect and test and then reflect and refine. And it's like, it's an ongoing process. So this is evidence of that work. And if you begin with, let's say, something is like this, right? I fear that if I put in all this hard work, a losing streak will basically means that I'm no longer profitable. And that's the only thing you have in your first line of the mental industry, then that's fine, right? That is your starting point. And that is a starting point of very, very many people. And that is enough. Don't feel like because you don't have this much stuff in your first step of this process that you're doing it wrong. Paul is just farther along in the process. So your starting point is your starting point. Okay. So robust description of the problem. Now, the second step is to describe why it makes logical sense that he is thinking and feeling this way. Now, one of the challenging things, and I would actually suggest for him and for anybody that is doing this, when there is this much stuff here, it's going to get messy if you're not actually kind of line iteming out each of these different kind of points that have to be broken down and be addressed. Because when I say messy, it's like you're going to forget stuff. I mean, even me, like I have to hold in my head all of the things that I want to prioritize in breaking this down versus, let's say, this one, right? So this is the first one that we identified. So that would be number 1. Number 2 is maybe this is a qualifier here. So we can kind of add this. Maybe it won't be something totally separate. We have to see, but I would actually maybe consider this as a second thing. This is absolutely the second one. So we've got 2, maybe 3. Oh, why did that not stay there? Oh, come on. This is the difference between. There we are. All right. So there's 2 or 3. A losing run can dent my view of myself as a profitable sports bettor. I put myself out there to friends. So this is probably, let's all call this one 3. So we're going to be kind and say that there's 3 different things that we have to now make sure are being tracked in this second step. Okay. So explain why it makes logical sense to you. This problem it is logical as the pain of losses is felt 10 times more than the excitement of winning. Okay. So that's true. But why would that necessarily contribute to any one of the things that we've highlighted? A lot of people lose gambling, and I know it requires a lot of work to remain in the top few winning punters. It's understandable that I don't like losses as it brings on a fear of failure, fear of loss, fear of humiliation. People are going to see losses as a problem in their situation. They do not have the skill to win. It's understandable to have doubts when you are losing, especially when the way to long-term profit is full of losing days and drawdowns, which are there to test the average punter. The longer the losing run is the compounding of accumulated emotion, the negative. Okay, so you can see that what's happening here is it's actually like a mixture of kind of all of these different pieces that I've identified. There's not one clear thing that I can say, okay, if I go back to this, right? As the losing run increases, it's a feeling of not variancing where there's something wrong, that something has changed. It's going to occur even though, right? I want to know why it makes sense that the losing run increases a feeling that it's not variance anymore. There's something wrong or something has changed. That's not actually reflected in this next step. There's nothing wrong with what he's written here, but what the mental hand history needs to uncover new insight and new perspectives. Otherwise, you're just like kind of copy pasting ideas that you already know well that can certainly help, right? Because as I said last time, right, the kind of the retraining process involves like developing ideas by injecting logic statements that you're going to use to correct your perspective. And it just needs to be trained. Sometimes it is just about training stuff that you already know well. Other times it's actually about uncovering new ideas. So we go to the next one. Yep. All right, I guess I can't redo what I was doing before. There's a feeling of disappointment in not being at the top of my bank anymore. Why does it make sense that there's disappointment? Well, I was likely attached to those results in a way that was probably connected to this next point, right? That I put myself out there to friends and family.
Perception.
And so, yeah, so the perception, right, is there becomes this like need or desire to attach to that high watermark in order to maintain that image of me being profitable. So I think what I kind of interpret as mostly what's being described down here is actually kind of targeting that last one, which is around the perception. And this is, I think, a kind of common mistake when things get a bit too jumbled up, which is that it ends up kind of flowing all together without, really kind of keying in on some very kind of tangible points. All right. So again, I'm being purposely pretty detailed here and not, but again, Paul, I know that you're doing a good job here and certainly doing the best you can. So hopefully you take the feedback for what it's intended to be. All right. So step 3 here. The logic is flawed because I have a long-term record that is profitable and I put the work and the analysis that is needed to keep the models improving and making more money. I have many models being bet, and these do not all need to be profitable for me to continue winning. And it would be almost impossible where all my models start losing. My models are proven to have an edge in the markets they compete in. I even make money in the UK, blah, blah, blah. Okay. So now I know that he or many of you would not kind of get to this, but my sense here is that what's happened is that Paul has not fully internalized his accomplishments to date. And we know that because right here, the logic is flawed because I have a long-term record. The fact that you are saying that here is your way of reminding yourself that you have a long-term record that is profitable.
Imposter syndrome 101, right?
Say it again.
Imposter syndrome.
Yeah, exactly. And so that like convincing yourself that this is true. I am going to be an advocate for the fact that you cannot be a losing punter for the rest of your career. Okay. And I'm going to say that because you've accomplished something already that very few have been able to do. You cannot have that taken away from you. Now, will you continue to be successful? To be debated, right? But the problem is like both with trading, for cash game poker players, you don't have like these tangible trophies, right? You don't get to win a major tournament in golf and have that trophy and have it in your house that can never get taken away from you. So, but yet you do though. That's the thing, right? You've earned that. You just don't have the hardware to kind of prove it. And so if you can internalize the fact that you are as accomplished as you are, and it can never be taken away from you, then it will kind of free you up from being able to, I think handle these, kind of short-term losses. So for me, what is actually flawed here is that lack of appreciation, not necessarily the reminder that you have a long-term record that's profitable. So I don't want to kind of belabor this much longer. I do want to just kind of jump to step 4, which is it really needs to be the corrections to the flaws that you find in step 3. And what I would say the mistakes are here, which is very, very common, is that it feels more procedural, right? The correction of the flaw. When a losing run happens, I need to stop and think about it. That's a procedure. You're telling yourself what you're going to do. You're not changing your perspective on how you're going to think and how you're going to react and what those underlying flaws are. So what I would say based on what we've said now is the correction of that flawed logic is I have accomplished something that can never be taken away from me. And so then the procedure is that in those moments, when I stop to think about, where I'm at in a losing run, that's what I'm going to think about. Okay. After a number of losing days, I should evaluate the 90-day, 100-day, 80-day trend. Again, procedural, not about the real corrections to the underlying flaws that are present there. So end rent.
That's really interesting and something I it's great having Paul as the example there, because A, he's very well known, B, he'll take that feedback the right way, and C, yeah, I think he is the perfect example of someone who has done this long term, and I fully hope and expect that we'll continue to do it long term. And I think is a really good highlight of, particularly in this industry, some of those social perspectives can get in the way of your head as well. Something that came out of the last meetup, there was an interesting bit of feedback that someone said where they were calling out how they traded both stocks and they had an automated wagering strategy as well. And they said that the way that their friends, their family, the emotional support that they got if they said, I had a bad day and I lost 10K because the stock market crashed, versus I had a bad day, I lost X because, in this particular instance, the Hawks sucked, for example, is very different. And particularly for a lot of people who are analytically driven anyway. I was just reading through that, like, I wonder how different that would be if it were, for example, a trading bot on the stock market as opposed to a trading bot on our markets. I wonder whether the perception would be the same. And given that you've worked, let's say, your poker players versus your stock traders, very, fairly comparable mental skills, I guess, but not two industries that are perceived the same way by the community. Do you see a different level of self perception across those two?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean,
see where I'm coming from?
I do. Yeah. I mean, like we cannot, I mean, it's difficult for everyone to remove societal influences. So yes, some people can do it and they can be less influenced by the perceptions of friends and family and society in terms of what they're doing. But when a job that you're doing, and there are many other jobs that have negative perceptions, they can take on a light that is misperceived in ways that I think are significantly unfair. So, maybe a better example would be, I had a really bad day at my inventory management job because I clicked a button and ended up purchasing something for 5% more than I should have, and it cost the company $50,000. And somebody would say, oh, it happens. It's, people make mistakes all the time. And, here you are working your butt off and, you just had a bad day for no fault of your own and you lost $3,000. And somebody says, you degenerate piece of whatever. And, what do you, I mean,
get a real job.
Get a real job. I mean, and so like, let's just be frank, right? Somebody that's opening up a retail store because they love whatever, right? They love clothing. They love selling sports memorabilia, right? Whatever it is, but they have no business acumen. They don't have the ability to negotiate leases, to find retail locations that are best for their particular market. No one would call them gamblers. And yet they're far bigger gamblers than anybody that's listening and watching this now. So yeah, I mean, society is full of, what we would say. And it becomes on you to formulate opinions of what you see in terms of the hypocrisy that exists, and to be able to communicate that hypocrisy in a way that is not demeaning or negative towards the others that are around you. Because when you can become influential in changing the perceptions of people's opinions of you or your profession, there's a lot of power in that. Right? And it starts with having a very clear understanding of what it is that you do and why it is not gambling, what gambling actually means. And when there are people that are open-minded, you can have reasonable conversations. And when you find somebody that is not open-minded, they are not somebody that is in your inner circle, even if it is close family members. They are not somebody that is going to influence your perception of yourself. And that is a hard thing to do, but you have to be selective, because otherwise you're going to bleed yourself the kind of vitality and energy you need to be able to, operate effectively in an industry like this, even if it is entertainment, right? It is still difficult. I mean, listen, I love playing competitive golf because it's hard, and I love the difficulty of it. So we all can be entertained by many different things. But yeah, those influences can be very subtle, right? If you're not kind of tuned into it.
The thing I would add to that is, having watched, over 5 years, a lot of people in this space, they have different conversations on the topic and struggle with it in different ways. Find a community who get it. Be that, we see some of the big syndicates. Part of why they're syndicates is because they're with other people who get it. Be it a group of people that you model with, a punters club, like lots of ways to do it. Or something like the Slack group, like find a community who understand why you do what you do and how you do it, because it can make a big difference. And they can also be and we'll talk about this later in terms of, when to stop. But they can, I think, be better, let's say, watchers to help you check in on where you're at with things. We've seen that people go, oh, you know what? This is where I'm at the moment. And they can just call you on things a bit better, because you'll share things that you wouldn't share with maybe friends and family, because they don't get it, and you won't share any of it because they don't get any of it.
Right.
Whereas, find people who do. I think that's my short takeaway. Anyway, that was really, really valuable. Thank you. And Paul says thank you very much. He really appreciates the feedback. And I think we might need to set up like a Betfair Quant of the Month trophy so people can get trophies.
Yeah, I see Craig's comment. Yes, 100%. You like make a trophy for yourself. Why not? Like, or a plaque, something you can hang on your wall. I mean, let's turn these tangible outcomes into something that you can see and hold on to permanently.
Yeah, and validate that you are good at what you do.
Yeah, because if we think about this pragmatically, like athletes retire, they reach a point, but does that take away? I mean, Tiger Woods won 15 majors. The fact that he is maybe not going to win another, we will see.
We'll see.
Let's assume that he doesn't. Let's assume that he doesn't. It's like he still won 15 majors, right? The fact that he will never change. So you have 5 successive years of profitable punting.
You'll always have
it could just never get taken away from you. That is an accomplishment. If you are unable to adapt to the new market conditions, if your life changes in a way that doesn't allow you to put in the time and effort, and you just can't cut it anymore, and it's time to, end it. Maybe I'm kind of jumping to the next topic, but it doesn't matter, right? You have that accomplishment permanently. So.
I like that. I really do. And I think that's one to think on. I'll take that offline. Thank you. Given I think we spent a bit more time on that than we want to, what would you like to jump to? Putting it back to you.
Yeah, why don't we talk about when it's time to kind of say goodbye. Maybe
when to call it.
Yeah. I think it's not necessarily a topic that everyone would want to kind of hear about, but I think so. The question is, at what point can you suggest that you don't necessarily have the personality or risk tolerance to be doing this? And it may be the question of doing it anymore. One of the kind of bigger mistakes, right, is this sort of the sunk cost fallacy, right, where you get so invested, you put so much time and effort, and so to walk away feels like you're kind of admitting failure. And so I would do a mental hand history on why that would be so distasteful, because at the end of the day, right, we can't have perfect predictive power about what we are going to find from doing anything that we do. Okay? We can make estimates, we can make judgments, but when you actually got to get into the thick of it, if something turns out to not be what you thought it was going to be, or your goals and motivations kind of change, right? It's like, oh, cool, I love, sports, and I love, finding edges, and I can see, there's just like a lot of things that you thought, you'd be able to kind of monetize or was going to be fun to do. Turns out that it maybe feels more monotonous or job-like or whatever. I mean, there's lots of kind of motivations that can change. That you don't want to, I think it's just very easy to not think about the risk of like bleeding your energy over a longer period of time when, you might find something else that could be a lot more, to your, going to serve you better. So here are just kind of a couple of things that I would suggest. Number one is if you are finding that punting is affecting your life in ways that are taking away from it. Like if you can't compartmentalize this so that it is affecting your mood on a day-to-day basis, and then that affects your interactions with friends and family and your desire to, work out and stay healthy or do other things you enjoy, that's at least pause for you to suggest it's time to take a step back. And I think a lot of times people, when they've invested so much time and effort, they feel like their decisions have to be permanent. It is okay to take a step back and say, you know what, I'm going to take a break for a week, 2 weeks, a month, and just get some perspective. Because when you're so in it, it's hard to maybe know how you're approaching it in a way that actually could be wrong. And then it's not necessarily that it's the wrong thing for you. It's just the way in which you're approaching it that is wrong, or the way in which you're balancing it and managing it that is wrong. And if you can fix that, then cool, you can find a way to actually make it work for you. But, taking that step back and actually giving yourself some space to see the way that you were operating and more of that third person perspective, I think is a really, really important thing. The other thing is that sometimes it can just be time and place, right? So there might be changes that are going on in your life. Maybe it's just not now. And if you step away, it doesn't mean that you can't come back to it at a certain point in the future. And I think that's something that again, it's hard to admit or acknowledge in the moment. But when you're able to learn how to kind of cut things sooner and faster and not let them bleed because you don't want to fail, because you don't want to feel like you've lost, that it was a mistake to even do this, that you're proving anybody right by having to step away. But if you can step back and really look at all the lessons that you learned from it, maybe the ways in which you've grown, maybe you become more tuned into mental and emotional things. And, there are skills that you can and will and maybe have developed here that are transferable. I mean, one of the things that I've talked about with a lot of poker players over the years, because some of them realized it was time to step away and they, just kind of lost the love of it. The games were getting were harder. It was just, they didn't want to have to juggle it anymore. They didn't want to see themselves 10 years from now still doing this. And it was either now or 5 years. And what was the difference? We might as well do it now. Struggled with like, well, what am I going to do next? And when you step back and understand, you've developed these like independent skills. And if you can sort of take away the lens of, well, I learned these things from poker. And so on my CV, it says poker player. It was like, no, I'm a risk analyst. I'm an independent researcher. And you kind of come up with this like laundry list of independent skills. Now, all of a sudden you have things that are quite saleable. And even if somebody else doesn't view it as such, you can kind of turn those skills into something else that would be, valuable in the market in some way. So again, we don't want this to occur, but if it comes to it, at a minimum, take a step back and have some perspective on yourself in a way that's, just going to give you some maybe fresh ideas.
I think there are a couple of things there. I mean, one, I've always held, like, I completely agree. If you can't stop for a set of time, probably means you need to go and have some serious conversations. But then the other one there is know what you're enjoying and know why you're enjoying it. So, I've certainly known people over the years who they're here because, like you said, they love sport and they love analytics and they love building models and predictive outcomes. But then as soon as they start placing bets, they actually get quite anxious about it and they don't enjoy that. And the emotional journey for them there isn't actually particularly healthy. And in terms of enjoyment, actually, they can still build the model. They can still share the model. They can post it on Squiggle. They can, there are lots of ways that if the bit that you actually enjoy is the analytical challenge, you can do that without the betting side. Know which bit you're getting your kicks from. And if that's being undermined by something else, then, review it because, like I said at the very beginning, we're here for this to be something you enjoy. And if it's not, well, let's review it because that's not why we're here. Right. So I think that was really good. I like that. Thank you very much. I know it's a tricky topic and one that we often don't talk about because, there's sort of this, either you are doing this for entertainment or you're a problem gambler,
Right.
as opposed to respecting that actually bits of this are a spectrum. And, lots of us have moments what we do that may be at different points. And the more we can talk about it honestly and openly, the healthier it'll be for everyone. So thank you for having that conversation. I think the one that's related to that is in terms of a journey. So, from being, new to building models, placing bets, poker, whatever, through to an old hat like Paul, who's been around and done it a few times over. How would you say that the role the mental game plays for someone might change over longevity, actually just time, but also experience? Like we said earlier, you acknowledged that Paul was more mature in his approach to the mental game, and it was great. Off the back of our last workshop, he sent me something saying that he'd got a lot out of it, despite being someone who, knows a lot more in this space than a lot. But also how you might go about applying it and the value you can get out of it. Do you have any thoughts about how that changes across time and where you might put your focus?
So stages and places. So early on, your focus on the mental performance side should be borrowed from your experience elsewhere in your life. So if you know that you're a perfectionist, if you know that you have control issues, if you know that you can't handle criticism and feedback and mistakes and failure in other aspects of your life, then you need to start working on that stuff at the beginning of your, kind of journey here so that you can kind of get ahead of it. But early on, the majority of your time ought to be spent more on the developing of analytics and, kind of the nuts and bolts of what it would take to be a good punter. That is first and foremost, right? I will be a horrendous modeler despite, my mental game being quite sound. I don't have the raw skills. So the skills are always more important. So early on, that's the priority. As you start to develop those skills and, kind of find the sort of line where you are maybe profitable or close to, but are now starting to identify, yes, I would be better, but not if it were not for, these distractions or my procrastination or, my inability to handle failure, or, any of the sort of, kind of early stage mental game issues, right? Then it becomes, kind of a bigger priority to shift focus back to that point. As you get farther along and maybe get to, somebody a Paul stature, right? The game does not go away. The game just changes. And so the degree of sophistication and precision, I have hour-long conversations with elite poker players or traders or the punters where we're talking about one bet, one trade, one hand for an hour. And we're doing that because they have such a dedication towards their own precision. And it's not just one hand, it's one hand that reflects many other decisions that they're making. They are just ruthless in their desire to understand themselves and the necessity to avoid those mistakes. And so, there can be this sort of teasing out between, was it really a technical thing or was it a mental? It's kind of hard. And as we kind of parse through it, we can eventually kind of get there. So there's always going to be a need to work on this. It's just a question of kind of what. So early, it's more personal. In those middle stages, it becomes a bit more of a, kind of classic mental game of poker, mental game of trading type stuff. As you get kind of farther along, it becomes this hybrid of technical, mental, very nuanced and sophisticated.
I would say that middle bit is often where it starts being apparent within this space. And the first thing that I'll often see is someone who has been modeling for a while, has built a model and keeps tinkering with it without betting. So it's interesting, you don't necessarily need to send something on. It's, like I said, there are lots of ways that you can have fun with your model. Nothing wrong with that. But if you want to turn it on, and knowing that you could do it with a few cents at a time without actually putting much money behind it, but you're not, because you are trying to perfect it, and I just watch people, and so many people go into this cycle of perfectionism and not being able to press go, even though anyone who's built a model or even looked at building a model knows that the difference between the modeling phase and how it might actually play out in reality is massive. And everyone who's done anything will tell you the best thing you can do is turn it on, even with set bets. That's the point where I see so many people's mental game sort of probably come to the fore of where they need to be focusing on things. Be that a conversation with themselves going, actually, I don't like betting. Absolutely fine. Acknowledge it. Or, you are really risk averse. Why, as you said, go through that mental hand history even of, well, actually, I don't like failure. Well, why is that valid? Or why is that not valid? I think, and I've had these conversations countless times with lots of people going, well, actually, well, why? And what would change for you to be comfortable to do that? I think if you're sitting here and that's where you're at least within an automated world, that's probably the point at which I think that you flick from beginner to, well, actually, you need to think mental game for a little while because it's now compromising your technical. Just as sort of an anecdote to your point.
Agreed.
On that journey, something that I've had a couple of people ask me, obviously you are wonderfully open with your resources, with your feedback, with your time, even your drop-in sessions on YouTube. Like, you do a lot of work with people and everyone's really grateful for that. At which point on a journey would you say that there's the most value for someone who wants to continue developing their mental game, be it in wagering, be it in golf or poker, be it as, someone in business? Because I know in what I do, I've definitely taken a lot out of your work. At which point on that continuum do you think someone would get the most value out of going, well, actually, I should find a one-on-one coach, be it you or someone else, and I should have some one-on-one time with them to take that next step? When do you think that starts being really valuable? Obviously, we can say, well, day dot, well, but where along that continuum do you think there's the most value?
When you've got a very clear understanding of what your problems are and you can't solve them yourself, right? So 2, 3, 4 weeks go by, you're just kind of banging your head up against the wall, trying to get past whatever issues you're experiencing, and you can't. So maybe a month is not enough time to firmly commit yourself to doing it. But, I would argue that at a certain point, something's got to change. So, I often say, if you get to that point, it just means that you don't understand the problem yet. So you can take a step back and try to reevaluate and work from yourself. But when you hire somebody else, you're hiring several things. Number one, you're getting somebody who can, kind of be that sounding board. Sometimes for some of my clients, they just need to hear themselves talk to somebody that is completely objective, that they know they can trust, that they know has some, and they're solving the problems themselves. I'd say that's probably 5 to 10% of people. Then you get the majority is they are actually stuck and they need somebody like me to come in and say, you're looking at this in the wrong way. You should be, you're not focused on this. You should be focused on this, or here's the real problem, or here's the real opportunity. And you need somebody to actually problem solve for you, because you are not going to get over the hump yourself. And if you are, it's going to take you so long that it's just no longer viable. And I think I actually had a conversation with a client of mine today, right? Because my hourly is $500 an hour, right? And it's not cheap. I understand that. But when you start to do kind of the calculation of, okay, well, how long might it take me to kind of recoup that investment, right? For some of my clients, it's
not very long.
Minutes. It's just not very long. And yet they'll kind of look at it as a like, oh, okay, well, I don't want to spend that kind of money because I could do it myself, or I'm going to, and it's kind of a funny calculation. My golf instructor, I pay $300 an hour for, and he's a phenomenal coach. And I would say that he, like me, is not like we're not. So I had a very, very clear conversation with people in esports when I had an intern working under me. Okay, and his hourly was 1/10 of mine. And so was I 10 times better than him? No, actually, I was an apple. He was a pencil. Like we're talking about two fundamentally different things. He was not capable of problem solving in the same way that I could. Now, me, if I go back 15 years to my early days of work, like I could actually say that I might have been able to get 10 to 20% of what I can do now in 4 to 6 sessions. Okay. So what I can do in 15 minutes would take me, 3 to 4 hours of time back then. So my hourly actually lines up, right? In terms of the EV of what you're getting for my time, it actually is, I actually haven't gotten a pay raise, right? So
it's not, it's not cutting the wire, it's knowing which wire to cut.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Yeah. So, I think you find somebody that is good, you're getting transformation. You're not getting some kind of linear progression here. And that's the calculation that is sometimes hard to make. And I'm not selling myself. I have, plenty of clients.
He's got a wait list.
Yeah, it's not, but it's more the idea of like the investment, right, needs to be thought of in different ways. Because I think sometimes people look at it as I'm going to go get a massage, right? A massage costs $80, $100, whatever. And there's like, oh yeah, okay, like someone is like slightly better than somebody else. And, it's just not the same. I mean, there's a reason why there's talent in sports. There's a reason why there's talent in certain professions, right? I go to a surgeon to get operated on. It's like, do you want to go with the best or do you want to go with the guy that's maybe like pretty good? And it's like, no, you want to go to the best because he's going to get you functional in a way that the other guy cannot. He cannot do the same thing. They are not both surgeons in the way that I'm talking about it here. One's a magician.
Yes. There's a reason that we asked you and not someone else. So I think the other thing I'd add to that is people suck at accountability. So, even on what you said, there's some things you can self-analyze and self-review and do yourself. Even that portion, a lot of people don't, and we have the Pauls of this world who will do all the grunt work, will do the journaling, will do the analysis and the self-reflection. A lot of people are actually really bad at that. And it's not even that they're bad at if they spent the time, it's not they necessarily be bad at it, they just won't spend the time. And if they commit to that with someone else, they're committing that that's something they are investing in. And sometimes it's more than just the time investments that some people need to put the cash there to then do the work themselves. And then obviously you're getting compound returns because you're doing the work yourself, and then you've got someone who can mentor and support that in the right way as well. It's a good response, so thank you for that. Thank you for all the time today and over the last couple of weeks. I really appreciate it. We will be cutting bits of these recordings and putting some articles together with obviously your input, Jared. And if there's anything on the topics that we've discussed in this workshop and the last, where you'd like to flesh it out a bit more, or there's an aspect that we didn't cover, or a particular case study you'd like to see it applied to, please share that, because again, this isn't a marketing ploy. We're here to legitimately try and put together resources that are valuable to you guys in the community, that give the opportunity to improve your A game as well as your B and C. So, we can only do it bad if you tell us what you need. So, please keep giving the feedback. I love this. Andy says he's getting a headache from nodding at all the areas he identifies with. That's absolutely perfect. And thank you all for joining at 11 o'clock on a Thursday, and for staying up so late. Good luck with the US Open. I hope that it plays well, or that you play well.
I didn't quite get through qualifying. I played well. I shot 74, 70 was going to get through. So I was 4 shots off. Tough conditions. I know what I need to work on.
Well, you do know. That's good.
Yeah.
You know, and we know too. So thank you very much for spending the time. It's been a bucket list. So really appreciate that. And I look forward to seeing you and the community again in the future at many more things. To the community, thanks for showing up. Thanks for the feedback. Thanks for the homework. Again, this isn't just Jared reading from a deck of slides for good reason, because we wanted this to be what you needed it to be. And thanks for having some pretty deep and meaningful conversations through, Jared, that, again, we're not just here for the laughs. So really appreciate, leaning in.
Absolutely.
Thank you
This
all.
has been fun.
Yeah, I really appreciate it. It's been great. So guys, as always, reach out if you need us. automationabetfair.com.au. I will see you around. And as the theme of today has gone, make sure you enjoy what you're doing. You're doing it for the right reasons. So make sure that is responsible and sustainable. And I hope to see you around. Thanks, guys. Have a good one. Bye.
Bye.